Hey, Night of the Twisters. We're going to finish it today. And of course, when you finish, I need you to take the accelerated reader test on it. And that will be for a grade, so make sure you take your time on that. If you've missed any chapters, you want to go make sure that you've listened to all of those before you take the test. I'll be expecting the test to be taken by today at the end of the school day. It was scarcely daylight when the National Guard choppers made their first overview of the city. Though we didn't know it at the time, they were carrying the mayor, the police chief, the city engineer, and two civil defense chiefs, all of them stunned to silence by what they saw. One of the officials was so shocked he later reported he hadn't even heard the sound of the rotors. That was the quietest helicopter ride I ever took, he said. All we knew for sure was in our cramped little jail cell it was morning and we wanted to get out of there. We didn't wait to ask permission. We just went ahead and used the John, which sure enough had stopped flushing, and then tiptoed out. Down below, Mrs. Minetti gave us money for the public phone so we could try to reach Grandma Hatch in the armory, but we struck out on both. Some calls are getting through, she told us, but if the lines are down, you won't get anything more than a busy signal. She had changed out of her uniform and was about to leave for the nearby town of Donovan, where she lived. When she heard us talking among ourselves about walking to Kmart and the armory, she asked the policewoman at the desk if she shouldn't just drive us in her car. If we can't get through, I'll take them home with me, she said. I hope not. I could see that she halfway liked the idea of that. Before we knew it, she was herding us toward the same double glass doors we'd walked through 5 or 6 hours earlier. Outside, dawn showed us a gray and sodden world. It didn't look as if the sun would rise or set on anybody that 4th day of June. I'd always wondered what Grandpa meant when he said he could smell tornado weather. I've always been able to feel it. My clothes never really dry out. The humidity that morning must have been 90%. Or maybe it wasn't the weather right then. Maybe it was me. Maybe I was a lot more worried than I knew. For whatever worry, humidity, or nerves, I found the air heavy and musty and very hard to breathe. I finally knew what Grandpa was talking about. You guys live in the Midwest, so you kind of know you know the feeling when it's going to rain, and sometimes even when it's going to storm. It's just kind of a moist, misty feeling, and sometimes it's very quiet also right before the storm. The calm before the storm, they call it. I can't remember much about going to the armory except that we got through without any trouble. Inside, there were people everywhere, asleep on cots and just waking up. Stacy and Arthur led us straight past the gym and down a dark hall to their dad's office. Remember, their dad works at this armory where people are staying since their homes are destroyed. That's where we found Mr. Darlington looking really hashed, yelling at some operator on the phone. I'll never forget the expression on his face when he saw us. He grabbed up his kids as if they were featherweights, one in each arm, kissing and hugging them like crazy. We couldn't stop smiling, any of us. Mr. Darlington hugged me too, until I thought my ribs would crack. He's a great big man, someone who doesn't know his own strength when it comes to a welterweight like me. Where were you? He asked. I got through to Dan's place and I searched everywhere. The Millers told me they saw you leaving and that's all I had to go on. Mrs. Minetti explained about the jail, with the rest of us adding our two bits worth. Then he sent Stacy and Arthur off to find the rest of their family. No, he said he hadn't seen my dad or Aunt Goldie, either one. I just stood there feeling worse by the minute as he and Mrs. Minetti went on talking. We'd no sooner turned to leave than back came Arthur to smack me a couple of good ones on the arm, finishing off what his dad had begun. See ya, Hatch, he said, letting me grab him around the neck before he took off again. He was going to see me more than ever in the days ahead, but neither of us knew it then. In no time at all, Mrs. Minetti and I were back in her Dodge en route to Kmart. I kept my fingers crossed all the way to Highway 34 and then nearly died when the National Guard Patrol wouldn't let us pass. Only after Minetti produced her official ID did he wave us around in the other traffic and trying to enter the city. Approaching from this direction, she told me, we just might make it. When we got to South Locust and saw what loomed ahead of us in the early light, we changed our minds. The street was jammed with bulldozers, trucks, emergency vehicles, National Guardsmen on foot. An ambulance was trying to get through behind a piece of heavy equipment, wailing and wailing without making any headway. The familiar skyline was gone. Once sturdy buildings were now so many layers of rubble. The sight of those groaning bulldozers pushing the debris into piles made me sick to my stomach. I remembered that my dad would come in this way from Phillips if he came in. What would he think seeing all this? What would he think had happened to us? We tried another way but had to turn back because of downed wires and water. The next 2 streets were blockaded as well. Finally, Mrs. Minetti pulled to the curb and parked. She looked at me a long time, shaking her head. I knew what she was going to say. I know you don't want to, but you're going to have to come home with me. Or let me take you back to the armory. Believe me, your mother wouldn't want you here. It's a war zone. Can't I just walk to the Kmart? I begged her. It's not that far now. You don't know how my mom worries when she doesn't know where I am. Oh, Dan. Her eyes filled up with tears. I just can't leave you here. I already had the door open, glad she wasn't going to try to stop me. I'll be okay, honest. Wait. She reached for me all right, but by then I was free. I waved at her and ran, tears streaming down my face. I don't know why I was crying, but I was. I know why I was crying. There's a lot to worry about, isn't it? Crying as hard as I ever had, crying and running. Around the barricades, splashing through the low places, leaping over the kindling wood remains of someone's house, dodging wires that draped crazily everywhere. I never stopped and I never looked back. I'm sure it wasn't yet 7 by the time I got to the 1600 block on Locust and spotted the Kmart, but everyone else seemed to have beat me. The parking lot was overflowing, and there were news van guys with TV cameras, ambulances, and fire trucks, and National Guard jeeps everywhere. Besides the rumbling engines, sounds of walkie-talkies and CBs and people shouting orders came at me from all sides. I skirted along the edge of the parking lot, passing the Salvation Army van, the medics, and the rows of chemical toilets to reach the store itself. My heart was pounding like crazy, but I didn't get there soon enough after all. A guy wearing a hard hat stopped me. Hey, son, don't go in there, he yelled at me. I whirled around. My mom's here. I want to see her. He left the small loader he was riding and came over. This is the official operations center. It's the CP now, the command post. Civilians are all gone. They brought her here on a school bus, I cried breathlessly, trying to shake and starting to get mad. They evacuated everyone during the night. The water's an inch deep in there. Too much damage. He started off. I put my face to the glass door, trying to look in, but he saw me. Don't you go in there now. Do you hear me? I looked away. I backed away. Where'd they take everybody? I called him. All over. Some went to the armory, Bar Junior High, the churches, everywhere. You have to make the rounds. The armory? I had a good reason to cry now. I was just there. I walked away so he wouldn't yell at me again and then sat on the curb trying to decide what to do. There I was, smack dab in the middle of the CP, and I was worse off than ever. The parking lot blurred in front of my eyes. Don't get mad, I told myself. What is the use? And don't be a crybaby either. Just figure things out. You drove a police cruiser last night, remember? You can do whatever you have to. I wiped my face on my sleeve and took some deep breaths, trying to decide where Dad would go to look for us. He'd go home first, and then after that, to the armory? If Mom was at the armory, sooner or later she'd run into the Darlingtons, and they would tell her I was okay. Maybe I should go home, too. The armory was too far away. I looked up. The colors had grown brighter, and day was coming on fast, and I noticed a Red Cross van that I hadn't seen before. And I saw the first aid station I zoomed right past, and the medics loading on ambulance. They were sloshing around in water that was ankle deep in places. About then, a police car limped into the parking lot with its left rear tire flapping against the wet cement, a sight that would have cracked me up any other time. I was beginning to feel like a casualty myself, although I could see there was no place here for ordinary survivors like me. A kid who can't find his parents isn't very high on the priority list. I stood up, stuffed my shirt in my jeans. I knew I could get back home, and if I crossed Fauner Park, it wouldn't be that long of a walk. The scary part was thinking that there was nowhere to go back to. Not even Minerva. I knew it in my bones. Not even my cat would be there. But home base is home base, no matter how much it's been torn up. Just then a whiff of coffee drifted toward me with the Salvation Army van. What a good smell. The Salvation Army comes when there's been a disaster, and they end up giving away free food and free coffee and things like that to help people who are searching for injured people, or they also help the injured people. It was identical to what came out of our coffee maker every morning of my life, but I never thought about before. Now I was thinking about it. Dad says he doesn't wake up until he's had a cup of coffee. I guess the coffee was waking me up too, the smell of it, in another way. It gave me hope. Even that thin little whiff I was getting that things would be normal again. It was while cutting through the vast cement parking area of the racetrack, wondering why Fauner Park had so little damage, that I heard the sound of a truck accelerating somewhere behind me. 2 cars had already passed me, and people were discovering they could get through this way, and I'd been jogging and walking by turns, sailing over the few branches that were down, half wishing that I'd asked those Salvation Army ladies for a sandwich. Suddenly, the sound of that 5-liter engine behind me registered in my brain. It was my dad's pickup. Furthermore, I knew some spinal signal told me that he was driving. By the time they reached me, Mom, Dad, and Ryan, I was jumping up and down and yelling. The pickup was still rolling when Dad leaped out of the driver's seat and lifted me off my feet. Mom was out next, her arms around us both with Ryan squished in the middle. The dance we did right there on the Fauner Park racetrack could no way be choreographed, even by Aunt Goldie, who claimed she'd had 2 years of training in the East. We went on home from there, driving slow through streets that were still being cleared. A tornado had been on the ground near Phillips, but thank God it had missed the farm. Flooding is going to be your grandpa's worst problem, Dad told us. The irrigation pivots are standing in a lake right now. Then I learned how Dad had finally made his way to the house around 1:15, how he'd spent the next desperate hours trying to discover the rest of us. About 4:30 or so, he discovered Mom at the Presbyterian church, where she and Ryan and Smiley were sleeping on a rug in the minister's study. You kids were well hidden in that jail, Dad said after I told him about us. Everyone else was crowded into that underground shelter. I was there twice looking for you and your mother. He'd also gone to the armory, Stolly Park School, Civil Defense Headquarters, and 2 hospitals. When he finally found Mom at the church, it was Smiley who tried to convince him that we'd all be all right. Don't you worry none about those kids, she said. They're sly as foxes, those 3. Mark my words, they're holed up somewhere just waiting for daybreak. I had to grin when Dad told us that. And then we were turning on to Sand Crane Drive, and I wanted to close my eyes in the worst way. The nightmare was true. I knew it. I'd braced myself for it. But by daylight, everything was worse than I expected. Dad angled the truck at the curb in front of our place and cut the engine. Nobody made a move to get out. We just sat there. I leaned into Mom toward Ryan, who was bent on exploring my ear. Dad finally broke the silence. We'll be living on the farm a while, he said, in a voice scratchy as sandpaper. Their house is gone. You always want to read the very end if it says epilogue, or this one says as remembered 1 year later, because it's going to tell you everything that happened 1 year later. I guess we were lucky that Grandma still had a house and a table, one that pulled out to seat 6 extra people. The Darlingtons, being such a big family, were forced to split up after the tornado. Stacy moved in with her friend Evelyn. Arthur spent most of the summer with me on the farm. Ronnie Vay, who didn't eat or speak for 3 days after being thrown into Winnegar's bushes, ended up in California visiting her cousins. They said she wouldn't shut up once she got there. She must have been in shock from being thrown out from the tornado. Every night on the farm, after a back-breaking day's work at Grand Island, Arthur and I conked out on Grandma's sun porch. If the mosquitoes weren't too bad, we carried our mattresses outside and slept under the stars. One rainy, windy night, the whole bunch of us took shelter in the storm cellar with the spiders and the mice. We were all pretty nervous, though Grandpa's dog, Princess Fleabag, was the biggest coward there, shivering and howling when the wind reached a certain pitch. Even with my arms around her, she wouldn't calm down. I may just sell out and go to Arizona, Grandpa said in disgust as he lit the kerosene lantern for us. Nobody believed him. He was 3rd generation on that farm. He had seen hay straws driven through trees before from the wind. He wouldn't pull up his roots any more than we would. As it turned out, nearly everybody who lost a home did the same as the Darlingtons and the Hatches. What else can we do, Dad said to Grandpa, but clean up and start over. Thank goodness for insurance money and promises of government loans. The new house could be built squarely on the foundation of the original one, and Mom would get to choose all her favorite colors when it came time to decorate. Aunt Goldie was one of the few who decided not to rebuild. She was still so spacey from her tornado experience that she preferred getting an apartment closer to town, where there were lots of people around. That was okay with Arthur and me. It was a great consolation knowing those craft classes had gone with the wind. And though we didn't know it for several days, Aunt Goldie had sure enough been among the unlucky ones trapped at Meaves Bowling Alley the night of the Twisters. Except for hiding in the ladies' room with the others when the huge steel beams tore loose, she couldn't remember much of anything. 2 days later, she came to herself in a motel in Omaha, without her purse, a change of clothes, her toothbrush, or anything. She tried then to get a message to us, but went to pieces again when a telephone operator told her that Grand Island had been sealed off to the outside world. Naturally, Mom had been beside herself with worry all that time. Although we'd alerted police and rescue people, there was no way of knowing in all the confusion if anyone was really looking for missing persons. It was Friday of that week when a Red Cross lady drove Aunt Goldie out to the farm, and none of us asked questions. Not then. She was too shaky and confused, and we were too glad to see her. Grandma Hatch just made up another bed on the couch, and Aunt Goldie joined our temporary household by sleeping straight through 24 hours. Later, when her memory improved somewhat, Goldie told us she vaguely remembered fleeing from Meaves with a trucker who had headed his rig east on I-80, promising to get her to safety. True to his word, he took her to a safe place. That it was 150 miles down the road was a bafflement to us all. During the next few weeks, all that the people in Grand Island could talk about was Black Tuesday. Did you get hit? Became the official greeting on the street, and would you believe was the surest way to get a conversation started. Everyone had a story to tell. There was also no end to the comparing going on. After the official investigation, our storm was labeled a first-class freak. The 6 or 7 funnels that touched down didn't follow tornado rules at all. Not for size, direction, or velocity. Most tornadoes are less than a half a mile wide. Wouldn't you know that the one menacing the countryside near Phillips reached 5 miles in width? And in spite of the fact that 99.5% of northern hemisphere tornadoes turn counterclockwise, so almost 100% of tornadoes turn the opposite way of the clock, counterclockwise. 2 of ours spun the other way, clockwise. Even Dr. Fujita, the great tornado wizard, was baffled. Dr. Fujita is the one that made the scale that says category 5 tornado is the worst, and they are measured by how much damage they do and how strong the winds were. We had seen a video about that. I've never seen anything like it in my 27 years of tornado investigating, he said. I've never seen such a complicated tornado. I was hearing something else as the days went by, something that proved itself true again and again. What happens after the tornado is the real story. If you'd have been in south central Nebraska last summer, you'd have to agree. What do you do, for instance, when the city's water supply is polluted, when you aren't allowed to drink what isn't in the pipes, even if you had a faucet to turn it on? So this is before they had bottled water. Can you believe there was a time when we did not have bottled water? This is before that. Morning, noon, and night, we guzzled root beer, Pepsi, the Uncola drink, and Dr. Pepper. Whatever we could get. I never thought I'd get sick of drinking soda pop, but I did. Furthermore, what do you do when you don't have clothes to wear except the ones on your back, food to eat, or a place to go to the bathroom? Things can get hairy. You find yourself swapping a perfectly good wristwatch you found in the trash heap for a candy bar because you need the energy. And then the girl with the watch swaps it for a t-shirt that's cleaner than the one she's wearing. After a couple days, the meat begins to rot and stink in the grocery stores because there's no electricity. Strange dogs and horses start hanging around who need food and water as much as you do. By and by, there's talk of looters who come in to steal things. And every day, when the humidity's soaring, the hot sun beating down, you wonder how you'll get rid of the tons and tons of debris, or garbage, piling up everywhere. Like Dad said, you just raise up your head and yell, "Help!" And that's when the miracle happens. Suddenly, everyone became our neighbor. The National Guard, REACT, the Red Cross, volunteers whose own homes had been untouched. Neighbors were coming out of the woodwork, as the saying goes. The Mennonites arrived in droves, rolled up their sleeves, and dug in. A disaster team from as far away as Wichita Falls, Texas, showed up without having to be asked. One ancient farmer brought 15 milk cans full of water all the way from Broken Bow, Nebraska, every noon. Isn't that something? In heat you wouldn't believe, so people could quench their thirst. In our own neighborhood, Mrs. Smiley was the shining example. She got the Mennonites to move her 2 big tables on the grass and then conned the young men into passing 87 jars of canned goods through the basement windows. Every day she served applesauce, plums, cherries, and lukewarm stewed tomatoes to anyone who needed to eat, in floured paper cups. Mrs. Smiley's open house, which really was open to the sky, became a neighborhood gathering place. It was great to lie there in the shade of her cottonwoods for a minute if you needed to rest and gather your wits. Arthur and I and our dads did it several times. No wonder the Presbyterian Men's Club turned out full force the next weekend to start Mrs. Smiley's new roof. To tell you the truth, though, what tickled her most was having Arthur and me return her old screen door. Arthur found it unharmed exactly where he'd stashed it in his basement. With one of us at each end, we carried it from his place to hers. "Oh, it'll look wonderful on my new back porch," Mrs. Smiley said. "I'm so glad you saved it for me." Even the President of the United States dropped by to see us mopping up. Even he became our neighbor. "You won't be forgotten," promised Jimmy Carter, speaking from a foundation in the midst of the sand crane rubble. And we weren't. By the middle of August, Arthur's family had a government-issued trailer to live in rent-free. A week later, ours arrived. Up and down the street, hookups were installed and families moved back to their properties, so they lived in trailers until their houses were done. By the time school started, our neighborhood looked like a trailer town for sure. Mom's only complaint was that Ryan couldn't make it through a nap because there was so much hammering and sawing going on with all the building. Now an entire year has passed since that black letter day in June. I've gone through 4 inner tubes on the new Voyager Grandpa bought me. I also finished the 7th grade in that period of time and got an A on my science project. It wasn't easy, but I managed to demonstrate how radical changes in atmospheric pressure can cause sucking sounds in a person's drain pipes. Tonight, June 3rd, we're having an anniversary party here at our new house. Almost everyone in Grand Island is celebrating, as a matter of fact. KHAS TV is going to rerun the hour-long documentary they made of our disaster, so several neighbors are coming for potluck. Afterwards, we'll watch the show together. And give thanks, Grandma reminds me. The Darlingtons are coming, of course, and in fact, Arthur's already here, having offered to come early. In case you need me, he said. What he's doing is setting up card tables while I tend to Ryan. Keeping Ryan away from Minerva 2 is no small assignment, you understand. Aw, so they got a Minerva 2. The first one died in the tornado. Picture a circus bear, arms outstretched, swaying from side to side. That's Ryan, age 1.5, chasing the cat. From the front window, I can see Stacy coming down the street, pushing Tempest June, girl number 7 in a stroller. So Arthur has another sister. 7 sisters. My heart skips a beat the way it always does when I see Stacy. The person we're all going to miss tonight is Mrs. Smiley. She didn't make it all the way to the anniversary. She was sitting in the doctor's office one day in March, just waiting for an appointment. She hadn't been feeling too spry, she had told Mom earlier. I guess her dear old heart simply quit beating, Mom said that night. In my opinion, her heart was too big to be housed in such an insignificant body. You can't put a 6.6-liter engine in a little old compact and not expect something to blow. I was truly sorry she couldn't have been a spectator at her fine funeral. Everyone in the neighborhood came. Everyone. It was the kind of farewell Mrs. Smiley would have loved. Now in the kitchen, Mom and Aunt Goldie are making enough coleslaw to feed the entire National Guard. Doesn't it need something, said Aunt Goldie, like salt or vinegar or... It's perfect, said Mom. Just mix it, would you? In the dining room, Grandma Hatch, an apron over her lavender birthday dress, she got another one, is setting the table with our new dishes. Naturally, Grandpa's out in the garage with Dad restoring the Corvette, since it really got ruined in the tornado. That's their number one project. I can smell coffee coming in from the big 24-cup coffee pot that Mom has. Sure enough, over Ryan's gurgly laughter, I could hear a voice saying, Dan, would you and Arthur put paper plates on the card tables? Napkins and forks are in here, and hurry, we're running behind. Roger, we say together. And we run to do it. Arthur and I together. Buddies forever. So they survived. Everyone didn't, right? Mrs. Smiley did survive the tornado, but died the next year. But it's just a really cool story about a town and a surprising black letter day. But they survived.